Hey everybody, welcome back. My name is Elise, and this is 10 to Life, where we talk all things true crime and some things that teeter kind of on the border of true crime, such as cults, which I guess we could all agree kind of is true crime, and it falls under that. God, I just hit myself in the eye. It does fall under that umbrella. And if you're brand new and stopping by for the first time, first of all, welcome. Let me just kind of give you the skinny on what it is we talk about here. So like I said, my name's Annie. We talk all things true crime, and I try to do it in a way where we're just talking like friends. So I'm sitting here on my pink comfy couch, and I try to just break it down where it's more of a conversation, like I'm telling my bestie a true crime story. And if you also are new here, let me just kind of give you the official announcement that through October, we've kind of redubbed it Culttober, where every Friday I do a deep dive into a new cult or alleged cult. So today, Happy Friday, is another day that we are going into a cult. And I'm going to be honest, the one we are talking about today is one that I have heard of, but I never really knew much about. I never knew the details about it. I really didn't honestly even know the surface details about it. So as we continued researching this and as we were learning it, in my opinion, it is one of the worst cults that I have ever heard of. I've always been fascinated with cults for a few different reasons. One of the main ones being the psychological aspect of it, right? I want to know, how do these cult leaders have this power and strategic ability to really just take over somebody's mind and brainwash them into believing them and thinking everything they say is gospel and all of these things. But I'm also fascinated with the psychological aspect of what these members, these people go through to where they allow themselves to kind of, and that's probably the wrong term, not allow themselves, but to where they are susceptible, I should say, to being sucked in by these, charismatic leaders. Because in my mind, I always kind of think, I wonder what would happen if I walked into a Scientology building. I have all of these preconceived notions about it. Would they be able to flip me? Would they be able to change my mind? Would I drink the Kool-Aid, so to speak? Or if I went on an FLDS compound, what would happen? So I'm just curious, because I feel like a lot of us who have fortunately never been involved in a situation like that think, okay, there are certain instances where the red flag would start waving to where I'd be like, no, this reads, breathes, smells like a cult. I'm out of here. But these people and these members end up doing these crazy things. And it just makes me wonder, what is your mind rationalizing at that point, and how are you rationalizing it? So anyway, long-winded intro. I apologize for that. But I kind of just wanted to explain a little bit about why I'm so fascinated with cults. I know so many of you are, and I think it really is the psychological aspect of it that we're all kind of trying to understand. So today we are going to be talking about, yet again, another cult. Now this one, as I said, is pretty bad. We've already covered Scientology, FLDS, and today we are talking about Heaven's Gate. All right, guys, my name is Elise. This is 10 to Life. Let's dive right in. All right, 10 to Lifers, we have talked about it before, but we're going to talk about it again because debt sucks. Whether you are getting roped in through a great credit card offer or you're trying to earn points for an upgraded flight, somehow debt just creeps up on you, and then you're only paying off the interest, never really the principal, and you are just in this quicksand that is financial debt. How many of you wish there was a better solution to paying off your debt? Well, PDS Debt has customized 0% interest options for anyone struggling with credit cards, personal loans, collections, or medical bills. PDS Debt rolls all of your payments into one low 0% interest monthly payment, and everyone with over $10,000 or more in debt qualifies. And there's also no minimum credit score required. Bad and fair credit is accepted. So if you are making payments every month on your debt and your balances are not going down, this program is for you. PDS Debt is offering a free debt analysis to our listeners listeners just for completing the quick and easy debt assessment at pdsdebt.com/life. You will receive a full breakdown on how to save on interest each month and the quickest way to take care of your debt. Save thousands in interest and fees and pay off your debt in a fraction of the time. That's pdsdebt.com/life. There have been studies that show that cults typically pop up during periods of societal duress. In times of uncertainty, cults can really offer people a misguided sense of structure, support, and even belonging. And that seems to be the reason that so many groups like this came up during the 60s and even the 70s, with really young people just honestly trying to find their way in the world during the Vietnam and the Cold War, through economic challenges and even other trying times. Some cults during this time were more disturbing than others. You had the Manson family cult, and you had them committing heinous murders. You had the Children of God cult, which was sexually exploiting its members. There were a few different ones. However, there also were other groups, like Heaven's Gate, whose beliefs in UFOs seemed a little bit strange, but not necessarily dangerous or threatening, and it operated for nearly 22 years without incident. So how did this seemingly peaceful group end up becoming one of the most deadliest cults in recent history? While some believe that the death of the 39 Heaven's Gate followers was the result of a mass suicide, others believe that there was actually only one suicide and 38 murders. Now, this is the story of how a cult leader's personal descent into madness completely changed and ultimately ended innocent and vulnerable people's lives. On the night of July 23rd, 1995, Alan Hale was observing the night sky as usual. As a professional astronomer, he had spent hundreds of hours searching for comets in the particularly dark New Mexico sky where he lived. He set up his telescope in his driveway and decided to point it toward the Sagittarius constellation. And that's when he noticed a very bright and fuzzy moving object that he hadn't ever seen before in that area. So he decided to check his directory of known deep sky objects, and he realized that he might have just found a new undiscovered comet. So Alan then sent an email about what he had seen to the Central Bureau for Astronomical Telegrams, which is an organization that collects, validates, and releases information on new astronomical events. One state over in Arizona, a much more amateur astronomy enthusiast named Thomas Bopp was meeting up with some friends from a local astronomy club to go and stargaze in the desert. Now, Thomas didn't own his own telescope, and his friend had configured a homemade one that they were wanting to try out. So when Thomas took his turn to look into that telescope, he told the group that he too saw something moving in the Sagittarius constellation. The group looked at the star charts that they had brought along, and they realized that the object wasn't recorded on any of them. So he too tried to call the Central Bureau to report what he saw, but his cell phone had no service out in the desert, and he had to wait until he got home. When he finally was able to call the Bureau, Alan Hale had already sent his email. However, the Bureau wasn't sure which man made the discovery first, due to Thomas having to wait to make that call. They ultimately determined that Alan and Thomas likely happened to look into their telescopes around the exact same time, so they decided to name this new discovery the Hale-Bopp Comet. Now, you might be wondering what all the hype is about. Why are they racing to the phone or to the email to report this? But discovering a new comet is very rare. It's a really rare event, and Alan Hale and Thomas Bopp kind of became instant celebrities in the scientific community. They both received numerous awards, and they were able to further their careers in the astronomy field as well, through participating in various research projects. You see, Hale-Bopp wasn't just any comet. It was one of the brightest visible comets from Earth in the last century, and it had an extraordinarily long blue and white tail that could even be seen by the naked eye in high pollution areas. It was also one of the largest, making it easier for astronomers to study, which provided valuable scientific data, really broadening our understanding of comets in general. However, that wouldn't be the end of the Hale-Bopp comet's legacy. While the discovery significantly changed Alan and Thomas's life for the better, it also brought about unexpected tragedies. The Hale-Bopp comet was visible for an exceptionally long period of time, which made it one of the most widely observed comets in history. Since its initial discovery in 1995, it only grew in brightness and also in visibility as it gradually kind of moved across the sky, reaching its brightest period in 1997. After that, it would soon disappear from view and not be visible again for another 2,380 years. And during Hale-Bopp's brightest week, photographers around the world began sending in beautiful images of the comet, which graced the covers of magazines and newspapers everywhere, really. This was one of the best weeks of Thomas and Alan's lives, only second to the initial discovery itself. However, at the same time, that week ended up becoming one of Thomas's worst weeks as well. In order to catch that last glimpse of Hale-Bopp, Thomas's brother and sister-in-law made their way out to the desert to try and capture a photo. As they were standing beside the road, gazing up at the sky with their cameras, they were struck by a vehicle and they were killed on impact. However, that wasn't the only deadly incident to be associated with the comet. And instead of being remembered as a significant milestone in astronomy, it will forever be associated with one of the most deadly cults in modern history. So like I said, this episode is going to be about the Heaven's Gate cult, which many people associate with photos of the wide, crazy-eyed leader who believed in aliens. However, there's a lot more to it than that, and even though he looks a little out there, this man was somehow able to garner an extremely loyal following of men and women from all walks of life. But to understand how this group, which has been referred to as the cult of all cults, came to be, we need to go back to the beginning. And you're also probably wondering, Annie, hi, what the hell does a cult have to do with a comet? We are going to get there, guys. Marshall Herff Applewhite Jr. was born to parents Marshall Applewhite Sr. and Louise Applewhite. He was born on May 17, 1931 in Spur, Texas. Marshall Jr. was raised in a very strict and very religious home, with his father being a conservative Presbyterian minister. Even though they were strict, his parents were also said, though, to be extremely kind and also very loving people. Marshall had a close relationship with both of his parents and especially looked up to his father. Growing up, Marshall was said to be an especially bright and gifted and talented student as well. While he excelled in academics, his main passion was music, primarily playing the piano and the organ, which he probably got from his mother, who also played the piano at church. He was always involved in the choir and even performed solo songs for the congregation as well. Marshall graduated from high school in 1948, and from there he attended Austin College in Sherman, Texas, where he ended up earning a bachelor's degree in philosophy. During college, he ended up marrying his high school sweetheart named Ann Pierce, and they would go on to have 2 children together, named Mark and Lane. After college, Marshall decided that he wanted to become a minister just like his father, so he enrolled at a seminary college to study religion and theology. However, he quickly realized that he missed music while doing this, so he decided to drop out and move to North Carolina to become a music director at a Presbyterian church. Marshall really enjoyed this job. However, in 1954, abruptly, he was drafted into the Army. He and his family would have to spend 2 years in Austria and then New Mexico before ultimately he was honorably discharged in 1956. After his time in the service, Marshall then moved his family to Colorado, where he would go back to school to earn a master's degree in musical theater. In Colorado, Marshall began participating in the local theaters before ultimately deciding to move his family yet again to Alabama this time, and this was in 1960. In Alabama, Marshall got a job that he was extremely excited about, which was teaching chorus at the University of Alabama. However, it was this job that would lead to some of the very first rocky patches in his life. Because up until this point, Marshall had lived a pretty average, uneventful life, aside from, of course, being drafted to the Army. He moved around a lot and bounced back and forth between various career prospects, but his relationship with his wife was consistent, and he was said to be a very attentive family man who just absolutely adored his children. So his job as chorus director seemed like the perfect fit for him. But there was a part of Marshall that he had been suppressing. In 1965, faculty at the University of Alabama somehow discovered that he had actually been having an affair with a male student. So obviously he was fired from his position, but he suffered other consequences as well in his personal life, because when his wife Anne found out about the affair, she was not able to move past it. and it's not clear if Marshall even wanted her to. It seemed like the affair helped him realize who he really was. But Anne not only divorced him, she also took their children away from him too. After this, Marshall moved back to Texas, but he knew that he was going to have to tell his parents what had happened between him and Anne, and why she had also taken away the children and taken them with her. It wouldn't have made sense for them to have such a messy separation, unless he of course explained what the root cause of this was. So he figured that he should just get it over with, rip the Band-Aid off. However, he knew that this was going to be extremely difficult, especially when it came to his father. See, Marshall had always tried to make his father proud with everything he did in his life, but with him being such a conservative pastor in Texas in the 60s, Marshall was afraid of being rejected. Now, even though he was very nervous, Marshall felt like he and his parents had a strong enough relationship and a strong enough bond that they would be able to see past his sexual orientation. But unfortunately, he was wrong. His parents basically ended up shunning him, which was extremely traumatic for Marshall. His father even said that his son being gay must have been a punishment from God. Now, even after what happened in Alabama and all of this uproar with his family, losing his children, his wife, Marshall was able to get hired again for a music professor position at a private Catholic college in Texas. This college was called the University of St. Thomas. He was able to find happiness again by performing in the Houston Grand Opera, and he was even offered a lead role in an upcoming show. However, around this same time, history started to repeat itself again, and administrators at the Catholic college found out about Marshall having another relationship with a student. So he was forced to resign this time, and he would end up falling into a very deep depression. He ended up taking himself to a psychiatrist who told him that he would not be able to handle this lead role of the opera at the time, and he ended up withdrawing from the production. From there, Marshall was beginning to drown, not only in depression, but this great sense of shame as well. He felt like his sexuality had ruined everything in his life. He lost his wife, his children, 2 amazing jobs, singing opportunity, and of course contact with his family, his parents, his children, his ex-wife. One person who had a short friends with benefit type situation with Marshall said that he would talk about wanting to have a platonic relationship with someone, where sex wouldn't get in the way. To make matters worse, just 1 year later in 1971, his father passed away. So not being on good terms with his father at the time of his death absolutely devastated Marshall. He was now jobless, accumulating debt, experiencing guilt, and also grief, and so he started to begin having thoughts of ending his own life. He also apparently started to hear voices, which actually is not uncommon for people going through severe depression or a traumatic experience. It became almost so unbearable, though, that Marshall had no other choice but to admit himself into a psychiatric hospital. Now, instead of citing depression or thoughts of taking his own life as the reasoning, Marshall, who at the time was 40 years old, allegedly asked to be cured of his homosexuality, which in the 70s was actually still considered a mental disorder. It was at this hospital that he would meet a woman who would help him completely change his life, but not necessarily for the better. In the psychiatric hospital, Marshall was introduced to a 45-year-old nurse named Bonnie Lou Nettles. Bonnie and Marshall had a lot in common, as they both grew up in very strict Christian households. Bonnie Lou was born to William and Elizabeth Truesdell on August 29, 1927 in Houston, Texas. Her father was a painter and a paper hanger, and her mother Elizabeth took care of Bonnie and her 3 siblings. Now, Bonnie's family was struck with a horrible tragedy in 1930, when her sister Betty passed away unexpectedly while playing in the yard at only 5 years old. Now, not too much else is known about Bonnie's childhood, but she did go on to attend college at the Herman Hospital for Professional Nursing. She graduated as a registered nurse in 1948, and 1 year later, she met and married a man named Joseph Nettles. Joseph joined the Navy at only 15 years old, and later became an engineer and entrepreneur. Bonnie and Joseph had 4 children together: Terry, Joe, Robin, and Rosalind. Like Marshall, Bonnie also eventually drifted away from her church-going days, and instead, she joined a local lodge for a group called the Theosophical Society. The purpose of the Theosophical Society is to compare religions, philosophies, and sciences in order to learn about the human spirit. They also believe in reincarnation through the process of karma, promoting unity and social improvement. With other members of the lodge, Bonnie began studying astrology, conducting seances, and even believed that she was able to communicate with a deceased monk. Her oldest daughter, Terry, would later recall that she and her mom never felt like they fit in with the rest of the world. She said that they could go outside together and stare at the sky and look for flying saucers, and talked about how fun it would be if just one of them would stop, pick them up, and take them away. Now look, I get the fascination with UFOs, with aliens, especially right now, given all of the recent discoveries, whether you believe them or not, but I don't know many people, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I don't know many people who look up at the sky, see potential UFOs, and be like, man, I wish one of those would just pick me up and take me into another dimension. I think, if anything, people are scared by that, right? Even though they have said that aliens don't want to harm us, that if they wanted to harm us, they have the technologies and capabilities and smarts to have done so by now, which, look, this isn't meant to get off on a tangent of UFOs, but still, a little alarming if she and her mother made it a routine to wish away, or wish for, I should say, not wish away their normal life on Earth, I guess is the right way to say it, but wish for these UFOs to take them away. So, anyways, according to Bonnie, she had received very eerily similar messages from very different fortune tellers throughout her life, predicting that she would meet a very tall, pale, light-haired man that would be very important in her life. So as soon as Bonnie saw Marshall, made eye contact, she knew that that fortune had come true. So during his stay at the hospital, Bonnie asked Marshall for his birth certificate so that she could make an astrology chart for him. The two of them quickly developed a very, very close friendship, and Bonnie told Marshall that she believed that they had known each other in a past life, and that they had a very deep spiritual connection. She also practiced palm reading, so she practiced this on him, and in Marshall's highly vulnerable state, Bonnie was somehow able to convince him, and even herself, that they were destined to go on some sort of spiritual quest together. Marshall didn't know it, but even though Bonnie was working at the psychiatric hospital, she had some mental health issues of her own. Somehow they were both convinced that they were each other's platonic soulmates. See, they had absolutely zero attraction toward each other, and had actually agreed to steer clear of any sexuality altogether in order to discover their true purpose and to remain pure. To figure out what exactly this purpose was, they decided that they needed to leave together, and they needed to leave on New Year's Day in 1973. Now remember, Bonnie was married, so when Bonnie broke the news to her husband Joseph, he was devastated. In his eyes, their marriage had been happy, and 3 of their children were still young and living in the home. Now Bonnie was just leaving with some man that she wasn't even in love with or even attracted to, who she met in a psychiatric hospital, so that she could fulfill some vague purpose. Kind of bizarre, kind of alarming. Kind of rings very true of Charles Vallow, right? All of the things that Lori was telling him, and him being like, whoa, pump the brakes, you're sounding a little nutty here. An affair would have made way more sense, and might have been easier even for him to wrap his head around, but this wasn't making sense. But ultimately they split. Bonnie went off to do her thing, and Joseph went on to remarry and live a very long and happy life with his new wife. But for the children, being abandoned by their mother was extremely traumatic. As planned, Bonnie and Marshall set off on their journey together, which started just as a soul-searching road trip. While staying at a campground, Bonnie and Marshall had a vision, where apparently God revealed to them that they were the 2 witnesses, which was mentioned in the book of Revelation in the Bible. So they believed that they were sent to Earth to fulfill prophecies and to guide humanity toward spiritual transformation. Revelations also mentions a concept of recycling, which they interpreted as an event that would lead to the end of the world, and also as an opportunity for people to ascend into a higher level of existence. They believed that by shedding their human bodies through a process they called the graduation, they would be able to leave behind their earthly limitations and then join a spacecraft that would transport them to the next level, which was basically a tangible version of heaven. They believed that it was their job to gain followers to lead them to this salvation, and this led to them referring to themselves as the Two. Now, honestly, it's not really hard to understand why Bonnie and Marshall had a hard time interpreting the book of Revelation, because it's often considered one of the most confusing books in the Bible as a whole. It has a lot of metaphorical and even coded language, and when dealing with prophecies and the end times, it can be hard to discern what's supposed to be interpreted as literal or symbolic. Even though there are countless interpretations of Revelations and debates that have gone on for centuries, I'm not sure anyone has interpreted it quite like Bonnie and Marshall, though. So now that Bonnie and Marshall, or the Two, had an idea of what their quest or purpose was, they decided to write their beliefs down in a pamphlet and to hand it out to people to try to gain followers. The pamphlet basically stated that during the second coming, Jesus would come back as a man from Texas, and that they would be the two witnesses described in the book of Revelation by the apostle Luke, who would warn people about the upcoming judgment day. The two would then be killed, brought back to life, and transported in a spacecraft in front of spectators, which would prove their claims to the world. This act of proof would be called the demonstration. Now, unfortunately, Bonnie and Marshall's plan was put on hold after Marshall was arrested for keeping a rental car, and ironically, the model of the car was a Mercury Comet, and he had kept it past its due date. So he and Bonnie had been living in this car for nearly 9 months, and his excuse in court, get this, was that God had allowed him to use the car, and that he was above obeying earthly laws. Imagine if somebody said that when they were in court for a charge. God actually permitted this. He allowed me to do this, and I am not to be held to obey your earthly laws with you earthly beings. I'm above that. Like, if I were a jury or a judge, I'd be like, okay, time to commit him. Take him in. And with all of this, of course, that thought process wasn't too far off, because unfortunately for him, he wasn't above being held in earthly jail, because he ended up awaiting trial in jail for 6 months, leaving him with a lot of free time to think about and refine his beliefs. Bonnie went back to nursing while she waited for Marshall during this time. And then finally, after 6 months, he was credited with time served, and they were back at it. After his release, Marshall and Bonnie jumped right back into enabling each other's mental illnesses, whatever those may have been, and Bonnie even cut her hair to look exactly like Marshall's. Now, some people have wondered if maybe the two of them had been taking acid with how bizarre their ideologies were becoming. But I honestly think that it was more along the lines of a phenomenon called folie à deux, which is French for madness of two. A popular example of this would be the Joker and Harley Quinn relationship. It refers to a rare psychiatric phenomenon where two individuals share a delusion. It usually starts with one person known as the primary, who has a pre-existing psychiatric disorder, and their delusions are then passed on to another, known as the secondary or the recipient in this case. And this person usually has no history of psychosis. In folie à deux, also sometimes known as folie à deux, the secondary person starts to believe in and adopt these same delusions, the same ones as the primary. The relationship between the primary and the secondary individuals is usually so close, such as family members or even intimate partners, and they also spend a significant amount of time together. The secondary person typically accepts the delusions without questioning or critical thinking, sometimes due to emotional dependence or even a desire to maintain the relationship. Now, the new term for folie à deux is the DSM-5, and it's shared psychotic disorder. Between the 90s and up until the last 5 years or so, most of society thought of people who believed in UFOs or aliens as, crazy tinfoil hat wearers, conspiracy theorists. But just recently, it seems, like I mentioned, that there has been this resurgence in the topic, with mainstream media even discussing it as a real possibility, rather than something to laugh at or make fun of. And it was a similar mindset in the 70s, which I think is why there were some people who were able to see Bonnie and Marshall as just two open-minded individuals rather than complete lunatics. Between the 50s and the 70s, there was a surge in science fiction movies about UFOs as well, and about extraterrestrial life, which fueled the public's curiosity, especially amongst younger people. There were numerous reported UFO sightings, which sparked discussions about the existence of life outside of Earth, and many people were seeking alternative perspectives about life in general. UFOs challenged traditional beliefs about our place in the universe. The rise of the New Age spiritual movements often incorporated ideas about extraterrestrial contact. So while it may be hard to believe, there were people interested in this kind of stuff. There were believers. Now, starting in Texas, Bonnie and Marshall began posting flyers and advertisements in several states near college campuses, on community bulletin boards, in spiritual centers, and even in churches. They felt like these would be good places to find people who were looking for spiritual fulfillment. The flyers said something along the lines of, if you have ever entertained the idea that there might be a real physical level in space beyond the confines of Earth, you will want to attend this meeting. In 1975, one of their first seminars took place in Oregon, and it brought in over 200 people who were interested in what this mysterious meeting would entail. During the seminar, they told the audience that they were alien lab technicians from a planet called Next Level, and that they were stuck inside human bodies. That they had been sent to find a crew to conduct an experiment to reach a superior evolutionary level. During the seminar, they referred to themselves as guinea and pig, and they did this to really drive home the experiment concept. Bonnie and Marshall reportedly spoke very serious and militant so that they could reflect their seriousness of their mission. Their explanations were very reminiscent of shows like Ancient Aliens, basically saying that the Bible had been misinterpreted and that when Jesus ascended into the clouds, it was actually an alien ascending in a spacecraft. Surprisingly, the meeting resulted in about 20 people from various backgrounds giving up their attachments to the human world. These weren't just any old nomadic free spirits either. They were people with careers, people with families, and people with a lot to lose. But somehow, Guinea and Pig, Bonnie and Marshall, had been so convincing that these people were willing to make extreme sacrifices to follow the two into heaven. Now get this. After all of this, Bonnie and Marshall decided to rename themselves. Once again, they already had Bonnie and Marshall, they already had Guinea and Pig, they already had the two, but that wasn't enough apparently. So they decided to rename themselves Bo and Peep. Bo and Peep, basically insinuating that their new followers were sheep. That same year, Bonnie and Marshall continued pushing forward with seminars, and they quickly gained around 80 followers. The group was primarily staying in various campgrounds, and Bonnie and Marshall administered very strict rules for the followers. They could no longer have any contact with friends or family. They could not take any drugs or drink alcohol, wear jewelry, have facial hair, and there was absolutely no sex. And this was because in order for the spaceship to come and pick them up, they had to be deemed as pure enough, and needed to get rid of any sense of worldliness, individuality, and become basically genderless. They were discouraged against forming friendships with other members or even discussing the teachings amongst themselves, as apparently this could run the risk of one doubtful person rubbing off on others. Before making any decision, they were told to ask themselves what Bonnie or Marshall would do in that situation. Basically their own version of WWJD. What would Jesus do? No. What would Bonnie and Marshall do? Although they were presented with the illusion that they could make choices, ultimately going against Bonnie or Marshall's recommendations would get them kicked out of the group. Not surprisingly, family members of the group became worried about their loved ones. Word of people selling all of their possessions, quitting their jobs, and dropping off the face of the earth to travel with alien prophets was also grabbing media attention as well, and CBS News even ran a story to discuss the disappearances. Not all people who attended seminars bought what Bonnie and Marshall were selling either, though, and journalists started picking up the story, making fun of this alien religion. Now, the publicity excited many of the members, who couldn't wait for the world to see the demonstration, as they called it, and to be proved wrong about the two. However, Bonnie and Marshall weren't as excited by this, and neither one of them didn't want to or know how to even deal with all of this publicity, all of this attention, and more than that, all of the criticism. So they decided to withdraw from the public eye, and they sent their followers out in groups of 2 to recruit new members in their place. By the beginning of 1976, the group, which at the time was calling itself Human Individual Metamorphosis, had gained nearly 200 followers. However, as Bonnie and Marshall stayed away from the group, they did begin starting to lose some members who couldn't handle it or kind of just got sick of the lifestyle, whichever. When the whole group reconvened, they had lost nearly half of the group. Bonnie and Marshall, though, were unfazed by this and even insinuated that it had been their plan all along to weed out the stragglers and to keep only the most loyal members in their crew. They also had 2 announcements, the first being that the harvest was over, which was really just a creepy way of saying that they weren't recruiting now and they were not accepting any new followers. However, the second would ultimately lead to even more members leaving. Bonnie and Marshall informed the remaining followers that they had received a message from the next level, stating that the demonstration, the one everybody was waiting for, was off. That there would be no display of Bonnie and Marshall being killed, brought back to life, and ascending into a spacecraft to prove themselves. Apparently, the media's character assassination on them had killed them, and it was proof enough, and any followers would just have to rely on blind faith now. Now, some saw the decision as a test of faith, and only strengthened their beliefs in the 2. The remaining group of less than 70 members were now named the official class, and Bonnie and Marshall changed their names from Bo and Peep to their final names. From then on, Bonnie would go by T and Marshall would go by Do. And this was in reference to the 2 final notes in the musical scale, Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, Do. It was also an homage to Bonnie's favorite movie, The Sound of Music, where Julie Andrews sings the Do, Re, Mi song. The era of the group was known as the campground phase, with the class sleeping in tents and T and Do sleeping in a camper. So now that they had their core group of followers, they could only talk so long and prepare them so much for whenever the UFO would arrive to get them, and they really weren't sure what to do to keep the class busy. Much of the time, the class would spend hours meditating and trying to prepare their minds for when the UFO would finally show up and bring them all into heaven. While T and Do were strict with the rules, it wasn't always boring. The class described them as being like parents or the cool teachers at school. They weren't exactly friends, but they were fun and caring authority figures. In their spare time, they played games. They watched TV using a generator, and at night, members would take shifts watching the sky for any sign of a UFO. There were several times when Bonnie, or T, would have visions of a spaceship coming, and everyone would pack up and then wait for it to arrive. However, time and time again, that spaceship never came. But the group just chalked it up to another test of faith, or T misinterpreting her visions. Over time, some members had left out of pure boredom from waiting around for this spacecraft, and others had left for feeling too oppressed by the strict rules. By 1979, around 40 people were left in this group, and the no bonding rule had really kind of gone out the window, because the remaining members were all extremely close, and they were now operating like a family. And T and Do decided that they should move from staying in the woods into actual houses. However, they still opted not to stay in any one place for more than 6 months due to families sending private investigators and even law enforcement looking for their long-lost loved ones. And they also wanted to keep the media out of their super secret business. All of the group's living expenses were paid for by members pulling together money that they had made from selling all of their possessions, from their savings accounts, their 401ks. One member even had a trust fund, and others had inheritances. However, now not only did their finances start to begin to dwindle now that they were living in houses, but the members were also growing bored and feeling unfulfilled. So to combat both issues, it was decided that the members with the most lucrative work experience would go and get jobs, while using fake names, of course, and then the others would do housework at home. With just 12 members of the group working jobs, they were able to make around $400,000 a year, which for a communal group living below their means was more than enough. With this new way of living, rules of the group were a little bit different, but just as strict, if not more strict. not for any particular reason other than maintaining obedience required for the next level mind. All of the days were scheduled down to the minute. The workers all left home with the same amount of pocket money down to the cent. They all shaved the exact same direction. They cut and styled their hair the same, even the women, and they all had matching clothing picked out for them by T and Doe. And this was all to prepare them for the next level, where there was no gender or variation between men and women. They were still forbidden from engaging in any sexual activity or even having sexual thoughts, because remember, they needed to be as pure as possible for the next level. Some of the men were so desperate to keep themselves pure that they even decided to get themselves surgically castrated. Now, unlike a vasectomy, surgical castration involves the actual removal of the testes, which causes the sex organ to shrink and stop functioning or producing sperm, and it ends sexual interest and behavior. Now, I'm not even a man, and that sounds absolutely freaking horrible and kind of barbaric in my opinion.
Tell you what, I don't know if you remember Doe talking about that some students had proven to him that they desired to have their vehicles neutered. And I'm one of those students that did that. And I can't tell you how free that has made me feel. I've been here long enough from the time I had that operation to know the freedom that it offers me.
They were also all given new names. T and Doe had decided that since they had been acting as the class members' adoptive parents, that they should all be given the same last name. And they chose the name Audie. The first names are a little bit more confusing, and by that point, most of the members had adopted new generic names anyway as a new way to kind of keep a low profile. So each member would now take their current name, remove all of the vowels, and keep the first 3 of the remaining consonants. And I know that's really confusing, so I have a picture here to show you how it would work exactly. If the name was Sawyer, the new name would be Soyati, and if the name was Linda, it would be Lindati. Later, after personal growth in the group, the names would drop the Y, and then they would become Swayod and Lindod, and I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but literally, given the spelling, you tell me how you would pronounce it. Now, after that, you could apparently mature enough to change again and have Dote become your last name, making the examples turn into Swaydotty or Lindotty. I don't know, guys. Hopefully that makes sense. It's a little confusing, and I'm trying to make as much sense of the nonsense as I can make. So for years, the group, which I do think is safe to call it a cult at this point, they had been living pretty harmoniously, patiently waiting for the day that they were pure enough to ascend with T and Doe into heaven. However, some family members of the followers had gotten so desperate for answers that they ended up tracking each other down and forming basically a support group for people who have lost a loved one to the cult. They organized newsletters to provide new information or any updates that any of them had learned about the group or where they might possibly be, possible sightings, and it really became a way for the people left behind to not feel so alone and so left in the dark. After so many years, some followers were starting to feel more and more guilty about leaving their families, or at least having their families not know if they were even safe or even alive. So in 1982, T and Doe decided to let the members write home for Mother's Day. This may have been because, unbeknownst to them, T had been secretly writing letters to her oldest daughter, Terry, for years. She even had been sending her money out of the cult's funds. So if T was able to feel guilt and the desire to communicate with her daughter, it's interesting how she expected the rest of the group to just forget about their own families. They even went one step further, and the next year, the group was given permission to visit home, but they had to tell their families that they had been studying computer science at a monastery. However, there was another event that same year that would throw a wrench into all of their lives and ultimately change this cult forever. After years of putting it off, due to, of course, being an invincible higher alien being, Bonnie decided it was finally time to visit the doctor after she started feeling a little bit strange. She was shockingly informed that she had metastatic melanoma, which would ultimately lead to her needing to get her eye removed. Sadly, the doctor also let her know that the cancer was spreading throughout her body. Now, I guess losing an eye wasn't proof enough that T was in fact not invincible, because she basically called the doctor a quack and went on about with her life. However, 2 years later, the cancer began attacking her liver, and much more aggressively. When the group was informed, they were confused, as they had been told that they would need their pure physical bodies in order to ascend to the spaceship. And they were even more confused on what losing T would mean for the entire ideology of the group. T and Do were a package deal in their eyes, so what would this now mean? And what would happen if the two became the one? As expected, T's health had steadily declined, and she was admitted into a Texas hospital. But suddenly, 1 week later, she seemed to start feeling better. She wasn't having any symptoms, and she was looking like her old self, and for a short time, the group was hopeful that maybe she really was invincible and would be okay. However, that ended up not being the case, and it actually is a common phenomenon for critically ill people to get a surge of energy and even appear to improve right before they die, which is what ended up happening to Bonnie Nettles. She ended up passing away on June 19th, 1985, at the age of 57. So the group was distraught. Why hadn't T turned into an alien? Why didn't a spaceship come and pick her up? Was this all another test? But nobody was as heartbroken and as lost as Marshall. And he was so consumed by grief that all he wanted was to be left alone for a while. So after having a ceremony to scatter her ashes, Marshall actually let the group go visit their family for 2 weeks so that he could have time to process what had happened and what the futures were going to look like. When the group returned, Doe's time alone led to some new, shocking revelations. And no big surprise here, but he explained that T's next level consciousness had been so strong that her physical body just couldn't handle it, and that's why it started breaking down. No longer would their bodies need to transform in order to ascend. Their ascension to the spaceship would be a purely spiritual one, and it would occur after all of them left their human vehicles, aka their bodies. And he also said that T would be there waiting for them. So years of blind loyalty, faith, and obedience made the cognitive disassociants among the group second nature. And they didn't even question this change and these new rules, and they never questioned Doe, who was now their sole leader. Losing Bonnie was not easy for anyone to move on from, and for Marshall, it felt just as, if not more unbearable than losing his own kids, and the support from his own family, and even the death of his father. When Marshall lost everyone, Bonnie had been there for him, and was even closer to him than a spouse. They and everyone else considered themselves one person, and all he really wanted was to reunite with her. Even within an entire cult worshiping him and doting over his every word, he still felt alone. It took almost 5 years for Marshall to go through the various stages of grief, and the most loyal members of the group stuck it out, having faith that this somber period would pass. And it did. Going into the 90s, Marshall seemed to be ready to put more energy into the group to prepare them for what was to come. He told the group that the next level fathers wanted the prophecies spread to more people, and that it was time to start recruiting new members after over a decade of living in secrecy.
You have to trust me. You have to believe me.
Gone were the days of posting these measly flyers on bulletin boards. The group tried a couple of new tactics, such as sending out mass letters warning the public of hostile space aliens, and even had some members attend Sexaholic Anonymous meetings to share how they were able to overcome their own urges and libido. Now, I doubt they brought up the whole castration thing, though, because that would be a way to probably not get any new members. In 1992, the group ended up relocating to California, and to kick things up a notch, Marshall decided to spend $30,000, which in the 90s would be equivalent to around $65,000 today. And he spent this to produce a series of videos called Beyond Human. There were 12 videos that they had broadcast on satellite TV.
This is your chance. I'm here. I can take you out of here. I can lead you into that kingdom level above human. That can't happen unless you leave the human world that you're in and come and follow me.
While the broadcasts didn't attract any new followers, it did get the attention of some previous ones who had left and decided to return. Marshall then paid for an ad in USA Today called UFO Cult Resurfaces with Final Offer. And they even sent the group out in teams to do some of their OG recruitment seminars. But Marshall was reportedly shocked and discouraged when these strategies didn't bring people in as he had expected. I mean, honestly though, who wouldn't want to join their group, right? So for a while, they went back into seclusion, until some of the more tech-savvy members realized that they could potentially use the growing popularity of the internet to use it to their advantage. First, they started several websites, including one called Computer Nomads, and later a web consulting business called Higher Source, which provided HTML source codes, basically creating and customizing websites for other businesses. They were actually very innovative in the website creation space and invented new ways of using something called meta tags, which are basically used to provide information about a web page's content to search engines and browsers. They also designed their own group's website that actually is still online today. Now, obviously, by today's standards, the website looks a little tacky and outdated. But at the time, this would have actually been considered really high-tech and cutting-edge. I stated earlier that over the years, the group went through several different names, but the URL of their website was heavensgate.com, and it would ultimately become the official and final name of the group. The members viewed the website as a way to reach more people and spread their beliefs, and they described the process of leaving their body as evolving to Tela, which is an abbreviation for the evolutionary level above human. Marshall posted a manifesto and various videos describing who he was, the mission of the group, and providing viewers with resources to study in case they wanted to join. Two of the videos were called Last Chance to Evacuate Earth Before It Is Recycled, and another called Planet About to Be Recycled, Your Only Chance to Survive. Leave with us.
Planet Earth about to be recycled. Your only chance to survive or evacuate is to leave with us. Now, that's a pretty major statement, pretty bold in terms of religion, in terms of anybody's intelligent thinking. To most people who would consider themselves intelligent beings, they'd say, well, that's absurd. What's all this doomsday stuff? What's all this prophetic stuff? You know, intelligent human beings should realize that everything has their cycle. They have their season. They have their beginning. They have their end. They have cycles. We're not saying that planet Earth is coming to an end. We're saying that planet Earth is about to be refurbished, spaded under, and have another chance to serve as a garden for another human civilization.
Their videos and website began making the rounds in the media again, but still, no one was really considering the group to be dangerous, even on the heels of numerous cult-related tragedies in recent years. Members of the group had long been told that at any time, the second coming would take place, and that spaceship would come and it would take away all of the followers. So after enduring years of unfulfilled prophecies and failed predictions, in the summer of 1995, there was finally a sign: the discovery of the Hale-Bopp comet. Marshall convinced the group that a spacecraft was following behind that comet. He had received telepathic confirmation that this would be their last chance to ascend, to meet up with T on the craft with the rest of the aliens, and to make their way into Heaven's Gate in their new, perfect alien bodies. But remember, to allow their spirits to ascend, they would have to release from their human vehicle. They didn't consider this suicide because they didn't believe that they were actually dying, just moving on to that next Tela stage, the evolutionary after of the human body. According to astronomers, the comet Hale-Bopp would be closest to the Earth in March of 1997, before it was going to disappear into space for over 2,000 years. So the next phase of the group's preparations would be the graduation. And since they would be leaving their earthly vehicles, their bodies, there really was no reason to spare any expense. In 1996, they rented a huge $1.6 million hilltop mansion in Rancho Santa Fe, California. And then they began taking bucket list trips to places like SeaWorld, Las Vegas, Mexico, and the San Diego Zoo. After years of strict, regimented diets, they also splurged at buffets at Taco Bell and very expensive steakhouses. However, it wasn't all fun and games. They were all riding a high of finally getting to go to the next level, but they still had some serious business to attend to. In groups of 2, each member began filming and posting exit statements, and they were posting these to Heaven's Gate website to share their thoughts, beliefs, and to provide insight into their mindset. Basically, the videos would serve as explanations for their actions to come, kind of almost like a note left behind when you're taking your own life.
We're so excited we don't know what to do because we're about to re-enter the level above human.
I couldn't have had a better life than I've had these 21 years. And if it was good here, I know it's been twice as good when I get up there.
This isn't a troubling circumstance. Don't take it as that. It's just a gateway, just a doorway.
What we're doing is we're going home. We're going home to those individuals who sent us here to do this task. And this is the happiest and joyous thing that you can possibly imagine. We're going home.
While most of the members seemed really happy and at times even giddy, during the videos you would think that they would have sparked some controversy and at least led to a wellness check or something. But I guess either no one was really paying attention at the time or maybe nobody was taking it very seriously, even though they explicitly stated their intentions to take their own lives. In one of Marshall's final videos, he seemed extremely happy and said that he had found peace and believed that he and his followers were about to go to a better place. On March 17, 1997, the group went to Marie Callender's, the restaurant, and this location for this restaurant was in Carlsbad, California. They all had the exact same thing: iced tea, salad with tomato vinegar dressing, turkey pot pies, and cheesecake with blueberries for dessert. Later that night, they prepared for the events that would take place the next day. While people around the world might have been gazing up at the sky to see the Hale-Bopp comet for the last time, members of Heaven's Gate were planning to hitch a ride on that comet to their next space dimension. The next day, the first shift of members followed a recipe which said, take the package of pudding or applesauce and eat a couple of tablespoons to make some room. Pour in the medicine, stir it up, and eat it fairly quickly. Drink the vodka beverage, lay back, and relax. Now, this medicine, the recipe that was being referred to, was phenobarbital, which is a medication used for medical conditions like seizures, and it slows down the activity in the brain and the nervous system. Phenobarbital is known to cause drowsiness and can even cause loss of consciousness, especially when mixed with alcohol. So the first shift of 15 followers took this mixture. They laid on their respective beds, put plastic bags over their heads, secured them with elastic, and then laid back as if to settle in for a nap. After passing out from this medicine, this mixture, the plastic bags would have suffocated them. The remaining members went around to remove the bags from the heads of the deceased crew members. They straightened them up by placing their arms at their sides and smoothing their clothing. They then covered their faces by draping a square purple shroud over the upper half of their bodies. The next group of 15 took their turn following the same procedure, with the remaining crew then adjusting their bodies after they had passed. The process went on for between 2 to 3 days, and on the last day, there were 9 crew members left. 6 more followed suit, while 3 members, including Marshall, waited until the very end to make sure that everything was cleaned up and presentable. Before the final 3 took their turn, they mailed out a few packages. Marshall was the third to last to go and was arranged like the others on his large bed in the master bedroom. The final 2 did everything at the same time so that no one would ever be left to ascend alone. They were the only ones who didn't have those purple pieces placed over them, which made me kind of wonder if they could secure plastic bags on themselves. Couldn't they cover themselves with this before they laid down? Regardless, the graduation of all of the members was now complete. And who knows, maybe they are on an alien spaceship right now as we speak, laughing at us. Maybe they're the ones that were in that backyard in Vegas or wherever it was. Who knows? So on March 25th, 1997, an inactive Heaven's Gate member named Rio D'Angelo received a FedEx package. In it, he found 2 tapes, one from Marshall called Doe's Final Exit, and another was a compilation of farewell messages from all of the members. There was a letter attached that said, "By the time you read this, we will have exited our vehicles." The next day, he asked a friend to drive him from where he was to LA to the group's house in Rancho Santa Fe so that he could see if what he had just read and watched was true. When he got to the house, he found an unlocked door and he made his way inside. Rio actually decided to pull out a video camera, not only because he knew the group liked to document everything, but also in case he needed proof. The house was eerily quiet, and as he walked through each room, he discovered the decomposing bodies of 39 of his old friends. When he came back outside, his friend recalled him looking as pale as a ghost. He called 911 and made an anonymous report of a cult mass suicide.
Hello? Yes, I need to report an anonymous tip. Who do I talk to?
Okay. This is regarding what?
This is regarding a mass suicide, and I can give you the address.
A deputy at the police station was given the assignment to go and check out the house. Now, he honestly thought that it was just a prank, so he didn't rush. He showed up to the house alone and then knocked on the door. When no one answered, he entered through an unlocked door that he found on the side of the house. The deputy was immediately overcome with the smell of death, unaware that inside there really were 39 bodies that had been decomposing for several days. After only finding the first set of bodies, he went back outside and called for backup. 2 more deputies arrived to help conduct a thorough search, and the only way of them being able to stand the house and the smell was to wear face masks. Plus, at that point, they didn't know what killed the residents or if there was an airborne substance. They checked the pulses of all 39 people, but nobody was alive. As soon as the media caught wind of a potential mass suicide, reporters, news vans, and helicopters began circling the house before detectives and crime scene investigators had even taken a step inside. When they finally did, they realized that the weirdness just kept coming. Due to everyone wearing the exact same clothing, having the short haircuts, no facial hair, no jewelry, or any distinguishable gender characteristics, the police actually assumed that all of the deceased were men. However, there were actually 21 women and 18 men, ranging between the ages of 26 and 72. Upon closer inspection, they found everyone to be wearing identical black sweatpants, shirts with embroidered armband patches which read Heaven's Gate Away Team, and brand new black and white Nike Decades. The Decades had been the shoe chosen by Marshall because they were on sale. Those who wore glasses had placed them carefully beside them, and all of them had a $5 bill and 3 quarters in their pocket. Some former members said that this was the exact amount of pocket money that everyone would carry when they left the house, signifying that they were leaving forever. Everyone either had an ID or a passport or a birth certificate in their pocket as well, so that their families could be notified. In fact, no names were released to the media until members of each of the cult members' families were contacted. After autopsies were conducted on all of the members, the medical examiner determined that since phenobarbital is a slow-acting drug, their deaths would not have been quick, even with that addition of the vodka, of the alcohol. Regardless, it was determined that each person took the substance on their own volition, and the manners of death were ruled suicide. However, there have been cult experts and psychiatrists who believe that in order to take your own life voluntarily, you have to have free will. And in their opinion, cult members typically don't have that. So they see these crew members, these followers, as victims of a hoax who sustained calculated psychological coercion. On the other hand, There are people who say that grown adults making a choice should not be lumped in with real victims, such as people born into a certain group, or people who are physically forced to stay somewhere. Heaven's Gate members often reiterated that they were free to leave at any point, any time, but some professionals point out that being allowed to leave is not the same as having free will. Being able to physically go somewhere else doesn't break a person's emotional attachments or fear of the leaders and fear of being out on their own when they have depended on the cult for all of their needs. That's why so many people who manage to escape from different cults have to go to extensive deprogramming therapy, or else their paranoia, guilt, fear, and loneliness will just pull them right back into the group. And I'm curious to know what you guys think about that. Do you think that this was just one person taking their own life and 38 murders? Or was everyone involved responsible for their own choices? The departure of the members of the Heaven's Gate cult is still the largest mass self-inflicted event to take place on American soil. However, the tragedy didn't end there, and some members who had left before the incident felt guilty for not going with their crewmates. It's estimated that between 3 to 6 previous members ended up taking their own lives in the following months. And some people who adopted the ideas later on ended their lives as well in hopes of joining the spaceship to Heaven's Gate. Now, I know the idea of an alien religion and memes of Marshall looking crazy-eyed can be funny to think about, but it can be easy to forget the tragic loss of life that took place as a result of this. What is it about these cults that make mothers and fathers leave their spouses, leave their children behind? How are people with amazing careers, so intelligent, convinced to drop everything, rid themselves of their possessions, and join a group like this? How is it that some people can convince others, and even themselves sometimes, that they are a divine prophet or an all-knowing spiritual leader? Something that sets this cult apart from so many others is that it's still not exactly clear what Bonnie or Marshall were even getting out of this. They weren't interested in sex, money, fame, and some people think that their intentions were actually pure. They think that Bonnie and Marshall weren't manipulating people for nefarious reasons, but rather because they actually believed what they were saying. It's obvious that Marshall and Bonnie had some serious mental health problems, and professionals have even pointed to Marshall possibly suffering from schizophrenia. There are theories that maybe Marshall suppressing his sexuality, being rejected, and losing a lot for coming out could have made him resent all sexuality. Maybe subconsciously he wanted to create a group where that would never be a factor. It's possible that he convinced his followers to cut off their families in an attempt to cope with losing his own. But then, what was Bonnie's excuse? Regardless, there were so many signs pointing to what was going to happen. And it almost seems like most people back then were more than willing to laugh at this alien cult rather than take their messages seriously. Maybe if Marshall had received actual mental health treatment, the deaths of over 40 people could have been prevented. The tragedy of Heaven's Gate cult is a haunting reminder of how dangerous extremist ideologies can be. It also shows how far some people can be pushed when they're consumed by a misguided sense of purpose or salvation. So I'm hopeful that this story can help open our eyes to the importance of mental health treatment, critical thinking, individual autonomy, and compassion for people affected by cults like Heaven's Gate. Now, if you didn't catch this last Monday's episode, just a few days ago, I did an episode on my podcast, which I do have a podcast. It is different from 10 to Life. It's still true crime, but we're able to be a little bit more uncensored, transparent, and have more of, kind of just an uncensored conversation about these things. So on Monday's episode, I had a few special guests on there. I had Dr. John and Lauren from the channel Hidden True Crime. Now, we talked all about the psychological aspect of these cults, not only the cult leaders, but the cult members. And we were talking about cults such as FLDS, Lori and Chad Daybell. We talked about 8 Passengers quite a bit as well, and Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrandt with connections. And Lauren had actually done some interviews with women from FLDS and from those compounds. So they really brought a lot of knowledge to the conversation. And it was really, I only thought we were going to be talking for an hour and we talked for like 2. They had so much information and really great insight to share. So if you have not listened to that episode yet, I highly encourage you to do so. It's on all podcast apps. It's called Serialously. I also will link it in the description for you, but we come out with deep dives of new cases every single Monday on the podcast. Again, it's just a less censored version over there where we can share different things and different information that we can't share here. We do deep dives every Monday. We also do a segment every Thursday called True Crime Headline Highlights, which goes over everything that has broken in true crime this week, updates to existing cases, new cases that have emerged. So there was a brand new episode yesterday you can go listen to. This is a little bit shorter. It's usually about 25-30 minutes, just giving you the bite-sized pieces of information about case updates we've been following, new cases that have broken, so that you can really feel in the know of all things going on true crime without having to necessarily dedicate hours and hours of your time to different podcasts and videos throughout the week. So that's a good resource for you too. And then we also have bonus ad-free episodes every Friday over on the podcast for those of you who just want an extra fix of true crime for your week. So check out the podcast if you haven't yet. I, again, will link that in the description below. And as a reminder too, kind of in tandem with that ad-free bonus content every Friday, we have revamped all of Patreon now. So many different tiers. So if you want more access and if you want more content, head over to Patreon. That's where we have the private group chat linked, where it's kind of like a private text thread on your phone where we are talking all day true crime together. It's personalized videos from me. It's bonus episodes. It's bonus videos. It's merch discounts. It's tons of giveaways, merch giveaways, all sorts of things. So take a look at that if you're interested and if you feel like you just want more. You just want more. But again, I know today was a long episode, so I'm going to leave it at that, guys. I hope that this was educational and helpful. It is one more Friday in Culttober. We've got one left, and it is going to be a doozy of a wrap-up. So make sure to tune back in next Friday for that. But as always, there are going to be other true crime videos along the way. If this was your first time tuning in, or even your second or third, and you haven't subscribed yet because you weren't quite sure if this channel's for you, but if you liked today's coverage, please just take a quick moment, hit that subscribe button below. That way you will be an official subscriber of the 10 to Life channel. It's totally free to do. Just make sure that next time you log into your YouTube, you see any new videos that we've posted. It's not to harass you, I promise, and it's free. It's just so that you don't miss anything as we update it. And that's all I got for you guys today. I'm finally having my MRI. Well, now that this is airing on Friday, I've had my MRI. I had it on Wednesday. So we'll see if I need jaw surgery, TBD. I don't know. Maybe I'll let you guys know in the community post if you're even interested. But I'm hoping that if I do have to have jaw surgery, I'm not going to be out of commission for too long. But I guess we'll see. But I know I was kind of talking weird today. I could feel it as I was going, and it's hurting really bad. I forgot to put my night guard in last night, and so I woke up this morning, and I could only open my mouth that big. It's not good. All right, guys, that is it for today's case. Thank you again so much for tuning in. Don't forget, in the comment section below, let me know, do you think that this was homicide? Or do you think that they took their lives of their own free will? Let me know in the comment section because there is a lot of debate out there on that. All right, thanks again, guys. And until the next case, stay safe.